Professeur Jubin Goodarzi, merci d'avoir accepté cette interview pour la Revue Militaire Suisse. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Alors pourriez-vous revenir brièvement sur votre parcours universitaire et professionnel, ainsi que sur les grandes étapes qui vous ont conduit à vous spécialiser sur les questions stratégiques et sur le Moyen-Orient?
Yes, I started my studies in international relations in Washington, D.C. I did my first degree in international relations, and I then did a master's degree. I focused on the Arab world and a master's in Arab studies. I myself am originally from the Middle East. I'm Persian from Iran, but I lived in many other countries, including Morocco and North Africa. And then I worked in Washington at a research institute, the Center for Strategic International Studies, CSIS, where I worked in the Middle East section for a number of years until I went to London to do my doctorate, which was also in the Middle East. It was on the alliance between Syria and Iran. And I also worked on a project on Iran and Syria at Chatham House in London, which is the Royal Institute of International Affairs. So my regional area of specialization has always been the Middle East, and I've always had an interest in foreign policy, strategic and military matters.
Alors comment s'est construite votre sensibilité aux enjeux militaires? Était-ce lié à votre parcours personnel, à votre formation ou à des événements historiques marquants?
I always had an interest in history since I was young, since I was a child, and that also developed into an interest in military history and military affairs, although I haven't served in the military. And of course, military affairs, strategic affairs are very important when you're studying international relations and strategic studies. So one has to look at things holistically, especially when one focuses on regions, whether it's the Middle East, Europe, or Africa.
Vous avez beaucoup publié sur la région du Moyen-Orient. Quelles évolutions structurelles majeures y avez-vous observées depuis une décennie?
A lot is the Middle East is a region which is always in flux, change, and unfortunately in turmoil because there are a lot of unresolved conflicts in the region, whether it's the issue of the Kurds, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the civil war in Yemen. So what we've seen is greater instability and volatility in the Middle East, and this of course has had detrimental impact and knock-on effects on neighboring countries and also Europe, as we saw, for example, in 2015 with the influx of refugees from Syria and other countries into Europe, which also has had implications in European politics in terms of policies of governments on national policies with regard to refugees and migration.
Les frappes récentes d'Israël contre l'Iran sont-elles motivées principalement par la crainte du programme nucléaire iranien ou par des facteurs régionaux comme l'effondrement du croissant chiite? D'autres avancent que c'est une manœuvre de diversion par rapport à Gaza et la Cisjordanie. Qu'en pensez-vous?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. I think it's a combination thereof. On one hand, Israel has always been concerned about Iran's nuclear program. Iran has maintained a hostile stance towards Israel since the 1979 revolution. Two countries had close relations under the Shah before the revolution. Israel, of course, also wants to maintain a nuclear monopoly in the Middle East. And of course, the fact that a country like Iran, which is hostile to it, having any nuclear know-how, even if it's not weaponized, is an area of concern. At the same time, the events since late 2023 have provided Israel an opportunity to try to change the situation in its own favor in terms of Hamas's ill-advised assault from Gaza on Israel, the weakening of Hamas and the war which has continued. Also then Hezbollah getting involved in the war, which basically backfired, whereby Hezbollah was basically cut down to size and weakened by Israel. So Hamas has been weakened. Hezbollah is out of the equation. And of course, then, very importantly, in December of this past year in 2024, we had the fall of the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Syria had been the most important ally of Iran since the 1979 revolution. So they had an alliance which had been around for 45 years. So that was a major blow and setback for Iran. So that weakened Iran's position. I don't think the war with Iran is a diversion from the Gaza conflict. Israel is basically trying to engage in both conflicts at the same time because they're both important to it in two different ways.
Quelles sont alors selon vous les chances de l'Iran de résister à la supériorité technologique israélienne dans ce conflit?
interesting question. Israel, of course, in many respects has technological superiority over Iran. It also has the firm backing of the United States. And of course, Iran, because of over the past 45 years since it's been on sanctions, it has on its own developed a very sophisticated military industry also, in some ways maybe not as sophisticated as that of Israel, but in terms of missile technology, surface-to-surface missiles, short range, medium range, and long range, it has developed a very formidable capability. And I think in the recent 5 days that we've had the war, the Israelis have actually been surprised by Iran's ability to launch missiles that have gotten, some of them have been gotten through and hit targets in Israel. Ultimately, I think there are a number of factors which will determine the outcome of the conflict. Of course, one is the ability of both sides to have missiles and ammunition to continue the conflict. Israel also getting resupplies of bombs and missiles for its air defense system from the US. Iran, in terms of its inventory, which of course is going to be degrading, running short, so how long it can continue. That's the question. And of course, I think the morale psychological factor is important among the two populations. Both populations seem to have actually, in Israel, the latest public opinion polls show that 80% of the population approve Israel's assault on Iran. In Iran, although the regime is unpopular among many people, most people have rallied around the flag, which of course, although they do not like the regime, they've rallied around the flag. So I think the psychological aspect, the moral factor is also very important. So we'll see how that plays out, because there's so many variables at play here.
Dans quelles conditions les États-Unis pourraient-ils intervenir militairement dans ce conflit?
Yes, it's very interesting because there have been developments over the past 24 hours since Trump left the G7 summit in Canada. It seems the United States is deploying forces in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf area and the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Oman. The US could very possibly get involved in the sense that Israel has started something, but Israel may not be able to finish the task which it set out to do completely. So here, the United States may enter to finish everything in terms of destroying the remaining nuclear installations such as Fordo, south of Qom, south of Tehran, and other things. But of course, if the US does intervene, I do not think there's any dispute about who would win in this regard, but I think then Iran can also do significant damage, and this can have regional consequences. Just over the past 24 hours, the Russian President Vladimir Putin also has basically conveyed a message to the United States not to enter the war and all that. So the Iranians have also been very active trying to reach out to Russia and China to get their support to deter any American intervention. But as so far it seems the prospects of an American intervention in the war are becoming more likely.
Depuis octobre 2023, quel changement majeur identifiez-vous dans les équilibres de pouvoir et les alliances au Moyen-Orient? Et que prévoyez-vous une fois la crise terminée? En particulier, la posture la plus affirmée de la Turquie vous semble-t-elle stabilisante ou déstabilisante? Et que penser de la normalisation avec Israël, poursuite des accords d'Abraham ou isolement croissant face aux opinions publiques arabes et musulmanes?
Yes, well, things have changed a great deal over the past 1.5 years since the Hamas assault on Israel. The position of the camp that was anti-Israel, or as the Iranians said, the axis of resistance, has become weakened because you've had more or less the weakening, the elimination of Ba'ath Syria under Assad. You've had the weakening of Hezbollah. You have Hamas is engaged in a life and death struggle against Israel, and Iran is now engaged also in a struggle against Israel. So for the moment, it seems the pendulum has shifted in favor of the United States, Israel, and the West. But again, we have to see what the outcome of this conflict is. Turkey, of course, is a very important country. I would say, it's one of the three major countries in terms of economy, population, weight in the Middle East, along with Egypt and also Iran. So Turkey can play a very critical role. Turkey's policy has been very mixed. In some respects, it has played a very constructive policy. Initially, Erdogan was trying to mediate between the Arabs and Israel and other countries play mediator, but over time Turkey has also developed a much more hard-line policy in some respects being very negative and not very constructive. So there are more questions than answers right now. So we have to see what happens, but definitely the tide seems to have turned in favor of the US and its allies, at least for the moment. And one indication of that was Trump's visit recently to the Arab states of the Persian Gulf region, where they also concluded not only multi-billion, but trillion-dollar defense agreements and arrangements with the US. And of course, Trump is encouraging a number of other Arab countries which have not signed peace treaties, recognize Israel to do so. But I think a lot depends also on the outcome of the Gaza war and also the war between Iran and Israel. So depending on those outcomes, that could actually facilitate normalization of other Arab countries with Israel, or this may actually set them back and they may be reluctant to normalize or establish relations with Israel.
Quels sont les défis majeurs de l'enseignement des relations internationales et de la stratégie aujourd'hui dans un contexte de polarisation et de guerre informationnelle?
Yes, teaching international relations is indeed very challenging nowadays because we live in a very fast-moving world. The United States is still, of course, the preponderant superpower, but things are changing. America has many problems, also domestically in terms of its economy, many key indicators, its infrastructure, education, healthcare. It's a huge debtor nation, having over $38 trillion worth of debt. But of course, you have the rise of China, you have other countries rising in the world, such as India, Brazil, countries in Africa also trying to assert themselves, such as South Africa, Nigeria, etc. So we're shifting gradually, I think, more towards a multipolar world, or a world where the BRICS countries and China will be more assertive. So it's a very interesting in time. And of course, technology is changing very fast. So we see that also in the war right now in terms of drones and other technologies. And of course, we have now the emergence of artificial intelligence, AI, and all these are going to have major implications in terms of the study of international relations and also the conduct of international relations. So in some ways, they'll be useful tools, and in some ways, they're going to present challenges both to states, governments, and also non-state actors.
Alors vous venez déjà un peu de répondre à ma question suivante, mais comment décririez-vous la situation mondiale actuelle? En dehors des zones de guerre, sommes-nous dans une sorte de nouvelle guerre froide ou dans quelque chose de plus instable encore?
Well, definitely one can argue that since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, at least in the Western context, we have a new Cold War with Russia, definitely there. But it's also much more multifaceted. So you have this enmity between the West and Russia, but many other countries in the global South do not share the Western perspective, although many countries in the global South, in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Many of them have still maintained close diplomatic and commercial ties with Russia because they see Russia as too important. Russia is the most important, the largest country in the world. It has the largest oil and gas reserves in the world. It's a major military power and a trade partner for some. So it cannot be ignored. And so I think we see countries in different major countries and continents kind of going in different directions. Its countries are not all moving in the same direction, and they're not always moving in the direction that the United States and the Europeans want them to go. So in that sense, it's become a much more complicated political landscape internationally. And this makes it both interesting and frustrating, fascinating at the same time.
Quel regard portez-vous alors sur l'évolution de la neutralité suisse? Peut-elle encore offrir ses bons offices, avoir un rôle spécifique dans les médiations et la diplomatie?
Yes, well, Switzerland, although Switzerland is a small neutral country, Switzerland historically has played a very important part in international relations, being the keeper of the Geneva Conventions, the home of the ICRC, and of course being the Geneva, having the largest concentration of international organizations and NGOs in the world. So Switzerland has played a very key role, and of course its role has evolved. Since the beginning of the century, Switzerland finally became a member of the United Nations. Of course, it has not become a member of the European Union, which I think is a good thing. I think Switzerland needs to maintain its uniqueness, its neutrality. Of course, Switzerland has been critical of, for example, of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but at the same time, Switzerland still remains a international meeting venue for negotiations to discuss world top problems in terms of humanitarian affairs, conflict resolution. And so I think Switzerland can indeed play a very constructive role in many conflicts. We're right now, of course, talking about the Israel-Iran conflict. And as many know, the Switzerland has historically, for example, played a key role in terms of mediating between Tehran and Washington. For example, the American interest section in Tehran is in the Swiss embassy. So Switzerland is definitely key, and I think it will continue to play a constructive role in terms of mediating and trying to resolve conflicts.
Quel conseil donneriez-vous à un jeune chercheur ou un étudiant qui souhaite comprendre les enjeux géopolitiques d'aujourd'hui sans tomber dans les discours simplistes ou partisans?
First thing I would say is read books. I think now we were talking about information technology. We have the smartphones and all that. Their surveys indicate that young people are less and less inclined to read books. So definitely read books from various subjects: international relations, strategic studies, economics, sociology, anthropology, psychology. Try to have a very broad liberal arts education. Try to look at things holistically, whether looking at international relations, conflicts, looking at the historical root causes, the different aspects. So try to keep an open mind and try to avoid just focusing on certain perspectives which you find in the media or on social media and all that. Try to look at all the different views regarding the different subtopics and all that. So consult as many sources as possible and keep an open mind and work hard.
Quels sont vos projets actuels de recherche ou de publication?
I've been working for a long time on writing a monograph, a book on U.S. policy in the Persian Gulf region in terms of U.S. policy towards Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia over the past 45 years. Since I worked for many years as a political advisor on the Middle East for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees here in Geneva, after I God willing, do that monograph on the Middle East, on the Persian Gulf, I hope to write my memoirs about my years when I was working as a political advisor at the United Nations. Over the years, I've written many articles on the Middle East, on U.S. foreign policy, the foreign policy of great powers, Iran foreign policy, security policy, etc., Iran-Arab relations. But those are my two main projects at the moment.
Alors, vous avez parlé d'articles et vous avez justement collaboré à plusieurs reprises avec la Revue Militaire Suisse. Que pensez-vous du rôle que joue ce média dans le débat stratégique?
I think it's very important. The Revue Militaire Suisse is, from what I understand, to the best of it's the second oldest military review in the world after a Portuguese military review. So Revue Militaire Suisse has been around for a very long time. So I think it's very important to try to disseminate accurate information and analysis to the readers, whether they're in the Swiss military, in the Swiss political establishment, and general readers in general of RMS. And yes, as you mentioned, I've written a number of articles. The first one was in the early 2006. It was on the Iran nuclear issue, and then I wrote one or two articles also on the Iranian Air Force and other things which had been requested by the editor-in-chief at the time. So I was always very happy to contribute and help out.
Enfin, y a-t-il une idée, un message, une inquiétude ou un souhait que vous souhaiteriez partager avec nos lecteurs et nos spectateurs à la lumière de vos recherches et de l'évolution du monde?
What I would say is try to seek the truth always. As I said, read as much as possible, read books, read different publications like Revue Militaire Suisse and other important publications, whether they're French language, English language, or others. Again, that's another thing. Different publications, depending on the country, may have different perspectives. So try to get as many different perspectives as possible. Study, be a very diligent, steadfast scholar. So I think that's very important, to work hard and keep an open mind. Those are, I think, the key elements that are important.
Professeur Goodarzi, merci beaucoup.
Je vous en prie, avec plaisir.